Hello, how's everyone doing today? Welcome. We are here with one of the most popular and well-loved libertarians of all time. How are you doing today?
How
And
you doing,
humble.
buddy?
Forgot to mention humble.
Yes, humble indeed.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Today is not the most special of days. I sort of like was up kind of late, woke up kind of late, and as you're aware, we're getting started a little late because I was thus running late from where I was coming from. So I'm a little discombobulated, but other than that, I'm doing great.
All right, good. So let's talk about a lot of interesting things I want to talk about. One of the things that I want to talk about is, first of all, I find it very interesting that now everyone's going crazy over this Confederate flag thing. The Amazon, they didn't really do it, but there's this rumor that Amazon is selling Dukes of Hazzard, removing the Confederate flag. Someone apparently called the police because there was a flea market where someone was selling the Confederate flag. What do you make of all this? Is just people being crazy?
If you want to ban a flag because it's a symbol of oppression, I would start with the United States flag that we happen to see all over the place. The Confederate flag, I don't think was the reason that some fanatic walked into a church and shot 9 people. I don't think that happened because of the Dukes of Hazzard. It's kind of a ridiculous thing, and it's something that people do in order to distract from the real issues at hand, right? I mean, I think that the biggest problem that you have. They're saying that this is a symbol of racism. I think the biggest problem that you have with race relations in the United States is that you can't talk about them. You can't have a conversation about race in the United States, at least if you're white. You can't have a frank conversation about race without being labeled a racist and being chased out of your career and having all manner of problems.
Mm-hmm. Right. And if you try to talk about it, then people will say, well, you don't know what it's like because you're not black or something.
And they don't know what it's like to be white, so let's have a conversation with each other about what these experiences are, and that's the whole point. People just act like, white people, we're supposed to have a conversation about race. I mean, this is the words out of Hillary Clinton's mouth, that we have to have a frank discussion about race in this country. But, of course, white people have to do it with their hands tied behind their backs. So we're not allowed to point out black on white crime statistics, but we're supposed to acknowledge that, there's all this, history of injustice from whites against blacks, but we don't want to talk about places in the world where blacks have turned on whites and all manner of things. So it's one of these things that you can't expect race relations to get repaired while white people have to discuss it with their hands tied behind their backs.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Andy Richter Controls the Universe, but there's a great episode making fun of all this nonsense where he's dating this black girl, and he says, I want to live in a colorblind society, and and not pay attention to race. And she goes, well, I'm proud of my race. And he goes, okay, fine, then I'll pay attention to your race. And she's like, no, I want you to judge me as an individual. So they agreed to simultaneously ignore and celebrate everything that makes them completely different and the same.
Well, I've told the story on my show a few times. I used to date a black girl, right? And I would go to sort of like family functions with her, and I'd be the only white guy there, right? And if you've ever been the only white guy in a room, like, they will pick on you, okay? And it's sort of like they get their chance almost, right? And it was just fun. Like, we just sort of acknowledged what was going on there, and we'd tell jokes. I remember saying at one point, well, on the bright side, if the police come here, I'll just get on the ground, throw my hands up, and say, thank God you're here, right? And, they got sort of a kick out of that. And we would just discuss it comfortably and openly, and it helped to ease a lot of the tensions.
Yeah. I mean, I also think people are very confused because, to me, I agree with Morgan Freeman. The best way to get rid of racism is just not to talk about it and judge people as individuals instead of obsessing about it all the time.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's healthy to just not talk about it, right? Because, I mean, that means that people are going to suppress ideas. People are thinking about race, right? Like, people are doing it. Look, if you find yourself being the only white guy in a room, you are going to be acutely aware of that, right? When a black guy finds that he's the only black guy in the room, he might be a little bit more used to that than you and I are, but he's certainly experiencing that, and he knows what it is. So if something's making somebody uncomfortable, then fine, why don't we just have that conversation? I actually think that that's probably like an unhealthy thing to do. I think that's what we do most of the time. Now, if people don't want to have an open and honest conversation about race, then of course, then let's just not talk about race, right? If people want to say like, well, we want to talk about white privilege, we just want to have this be a completely one-sided discussion about how terrible white people are. Now, of course, then let's leave that off, right? Because if you're going to scream about white privilege, I'm going to say, look, you know, there's some issues on the other side here too. And then you're going to say, well, you're a racist. Well, then that's not a good conversation to have. But if people want to have an honest discussion, if something's making somebody uncomfortable, then sure, let's talk about it.
Yeah. Well, I think white privilege itself, because isn't racist judging someone based on their race and making an assumption about them based on their race? So to assume because someone is white that this person has a better life or has less stumbling blocks is making an assumption based on his race.
Well, far be it for me to try to figure out what racism means. I mean, that word is so abused. It's so tortured. I mean, everything is racist. I saw a thing where a guy went to, of all things, like a May Day anti-capitalist rally, and the guy brought a gun with him, and he said that he was there to protect the free speech of the demonstrators, and people started yelling at him that it was racist for him to have a gun. So far be it for me to try to determine what racism is in this day and age, because it just seems to be applied to, I mean, racism is just another word for I don't like it at this point.
Yeah, and shutting down conversations and accusing people. I mean, one of the things that drives me crazy is when people misdirect things. So, you know, I mean, I never make the drug war about race, even though you could essentially do that. You could say more black people are in jail for drugs than whites. Powdered cocaine has a higher penalty. Crack cocaine has a higher penalty than powdered cocaine. And you can make it about race, but I think the problem doing that is that it detracts from the real issue. So when people scream racism, then it's not about police abuse. Then it's not about the violent state. The issue now is just racism.
Well, the thing that you get into, yeah, I mean, that's one thing. You're deterring from the real problem, which is the war on drugs is an atrocity that affects everybody. Right. And you could say, okay, you know, it disproportionately affects blacks, and that's evidenced by the number of blacks in prison. I don't know how crack cocaine having a higher penalty than powdered cocaine makes it racial, unless you're saying black people smoke crack, which I don't think a whole lot of these anti-racist people would really appreciate. But, you know, certainly to say that, I don't think whenever you see a demographic disparity that this necessarily indicates racism, right? I mean, there are behaviors and patterns that develop along cultural lines, and let's just face facts. I mean, people separate themselves racially, and that develops cultures, right? White liberals who are screaming about how wonderful diversity is are not moving into black neighborhoods. Right? They're not like, you know what, it'd be really great if I moved into a black neighborhood and then it'd be more diverse. Like, white liberals don't do that. And black people, when they make money, they move out of black neighborhoods and into white neighborhoods, right? So, I mean, there are behaviors that are, you know, sort of prevalent in cultures, and they lead to certain outcomes, right? So if there's more black people in prison and, you know, black people are, say, you know, more determined to, likely to be committing crimes in a society, well, that is not something that's entirely surprising to me, right? So I don't think that demographic disparities equal racism.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, they don't believe in diversity at all. I mean, diversity, I saw a great bit, diversity is a different color liberals, right? I mean, you know, to me, the opposite of diversity is inequality. You know, if I'm 5'10" and you're 5'10", we are equal in height, but if I'm 5'10" and you're 6 feet, there's diversity of height. So to say I believe in more diversity and I believe in more equality means you don't understand the words that you use.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, whenever you're talking to leftists, you are going to find yourself in a conversation that is wrought with contradiction, right? They're like, I want diversity and equality, and it's like, okay, well, you know, toss a coin and pick one, moron, because it's not how it's a failure to understand rudimentary English, certainly. Yeah,
and but also, you know, there was a great YouTube bit where a guy was asking for should there be affirmative action in the NBA, and I think his point basically is that certain for whatever reason, you know, why are Jews more interested in becoming, you know, lawyers or doctors or in the film industry, and Asians, you know, the stereotype that they're doing your laundry or dry cleaning. You know, it's not a race issue that more blacks are in the NBA. It's not because they love blacks more.
Well, right, and Walter Williams has a great bit. He has a video uptitled "How Much Can Discrimination Explain," and he talks about this. Now, just look at, if you see you have 20 people of equal height. Okay, there are 5 black men, 5 white men, 5 white women, and 5 black women, and you have to choose 5 of these people for a basketball team. Well, we all know what everybody's going to choose. They're going to choose the 5 black men for their basketball team, okay? And that's not because you hate white people. That's not because you hate women. It's because you are looking that it is statistically more likely that the black men are going to be better at basketball because you've, like, watched a basketball game or two, and it's just common sense. And so to sort of take these things and say, well, there's a demographic disparity, there's a statistical anomaly, and assign that to hatred or discrimination or prejudice or race, whatever it is you want to call it, it's absolutely absurd, and it just doesn't stand the most basic of logical scrutiny.
Yeah. Well, a lot of these things are crazy. I remember first hearing about that women get paid less than men, and when I first heard that, I said, well, you know, I'll support equal pay if I don't have to pay for dates. But there's no such thing as equal pay for equal work. Every individual does a job differently. How can you compare the work I do with the work some other guy does? We're going to do it in our own way. So there's no such thing, equal pay for equal work. That's nonsense.
Well, it's of course it's nonsense, and of course what you do is not necessarily what determines how much you get paid. I mean, there's salary negotiations. There's, you know, all the things that went into you getting the job to begin with. If there's just a higher demand for you, I mean, look, I imagine a woman who's really attractive might make more money than a woman who's really unattractive, even if her job has nothing to do with her looks. Why? Because she's preferable. There's going to be a higher demand for her, right? And so it wouldn't surprise me to find out that women with large breasts there's a pay gap between women with large breasts and women with small breasts. And I don't think that women with large breasts are going to start off on some kind of equality campaign to have their pay cuts to give more money to women with small tits. It's just complete nonsense. And so that you would say, well, there's a gender pay gap. Well, you know, if you start controlling for certain factors, like where exactly they are in their careers, whether or not they've gotten married, had children, taken time off from work, and all of those things, it actually disappears. And in a lot of instances, as a matter of fact, single women, I believe, actually make more money than single men. Married men make, on average, 38% more than single men, and that gap is actually not quite as prevalent for married women. Married women will make less than single women because, of course, they're probably going to take some time off to have children and that sort of thing. So when you if you actually look at the numbers and you stop taking it out of context like a moron, then you realize that this is not the case at all. If you look at Hillary Clinton's staff, the pay gap between men and women on Hillary Clinton's staff is actually greater than the national average gender pay gap. And what you realize, the Hillary Clinton came out, and as soon as she was called out on that, said, well, of course, because the men are doing different jobs. Well, duh, you know, so if that's what the case is in the Hillary Clinton campaign, I'm sorry to tell you that if corporate America, you know, has a gender diversity, you know, pay equality policy that is equal to the Hillary Clinton campaign, then I can't say that this is, you know, gender discrimination and capitalism run amok.
Right. I mean, and there are all sorts of questions that you have to ask. I mean, first of all, look, there are numerous reasons why, you know, I mean, one of the things that also is the difference for the pay gap, they say, is more men are typically more apt to ask for a raise than women. And if you don't ask, and you're more likely to get a raise if you ask for it than are assertive. So that also is a factor. Well,
right. That's why Ellen Pao, the now former CEO of Reddit, who just resigned, thankfully, because she was awful, she banned, when she became CEO of Reddit, she banned salary negotiations. Said, well, we're going to ban salary negotiations in order to have gender equality, because since men negotiate better, we're going to ban negotiation in order to level the playing field. And it's like, why would anybody want to work at a place like that? I mean, what was wrong with Reddit to hire this woman while she's in the middle of a gender discrimination suit against her former employer, which she lost miserably?
Right. And I mean, one of the questions that I'll answer, and it's contradictory because many things are contradictory. I love this pay gap discrimination. So one of the things that's contradictory is, so you're telling me that businesses are charitable, that they believe that they're willing to pay men less than they're worth, because apparently the women are underpaid, and the men are overpaid. So you believe that that CEOs who you claim are greedy are just willing to give overpay for men? And if women and men do equal work in all areas, why even hire men at all? Just hire women, and you'll have a cheaper labor. Which isn't that what everyone wants?
Well, yeah, of course, because I mean, this is exactly what I want to do in my life: is spend a whole lot of extra money just to be surrounded by dudes all the time, right? I mean, that makes perfect sense. No, I doubt that extraordinarily. And of course, it just takes, like, with all the publicity that this gender pay gap has received, you have to figure that, like, somebody at some point, some entrepreneurial whiz kid capitalist is going to turn around and be like, wait a second, I can save 33% on my staffing just by hiring beautiful women. That's fascinating. And somebody would have to come up with that at some point. Well, no, it doesn't stand up to the slightest bit of logical or economic scrutiny. And all of these things are just, every time you hear this pitched, is part of some government policy initiative, right? It's just some policy initiative where the government's going to seize more power and have more interference in the economy. And so let's just not be surprised when there's a lot of dishonesty whenever the government wants to seize power. It doesn't tend to result in a great deal of truthfulness, right? That's a story as old as the state itself.
I mean, I would also say a lot of these things are very they shoot themselves in the foot, because one of the things that I would add, a lot of these things lead to more disadvantages. I mean, look, I am more apt as an employer, likely to be, if I fire someone and I fire a black person versus a white male, straight male, I'm more apt to be sued by the black person for racial discrimination, even if I'm not, than the white person. So that is going to influence, do I really want to hire people who I believe I'm more likely to get a lawsuit in? So all this does is actually create the very bigotry that you say you want to get rid of.
Well, yeah, but then again, you also stand a chance to be sued for not hiring them, and therein the problem lies. And you have this situation. Ellen Powell is the perfect example. The former CEO of Reddit. She sued her employer. She had sex with a married coworker, and sure enough, stuff got weird at the office afterwards, right? And so she decided that because she, was the side piece, that this was gender discrimination, and she had problems at work, and what happened with the jury was the jury heard testimony after testimony and saw record after record. Well, no, she was outperformed by her male counterparts, and she was constantly hostile towards people at work, and she created an environment that nobody was comfortable in, and so she didn't get promoted. And then when she didn't get promoted, she sued her employer, and when she when she sued her employer, she was later fired. And then she added to the lawsuit. She said, "Well, she was fired for suing. You're not allowed to fire your employee if your employee sues you. This is the crazy, sick world that we live in, right?" It's like, if that's the kind of thing that's going on, and you make that part of a demographic, believe me when I tell you, yeah, you're going to have a disadvantage in the workplace, because nobody in their right mind would want to deal with that. Why am I going to deal with multi-billion-dollar lawsuits when I can just hire sane people who aren't going to give me a hard time? It's just ridiculous.
Wait, sorry. Let me just back up. Make sure I heard you right. She's suing someone for suing. She's suing someone for suing her.
No. She was sued the employer for gender discrimination because she didn't get a promotion. She's working at the place. She's still employed there, and she sues them for gender discrimination because she does not get promoted. Now, what happens is, as the jury hears, well, she had sex with a married coworker. It created this awkward environment at work. She was constantly, just complaining. She was outperformed by her male counterparts and all of this different stuff. And it turns out, no, you were genuinely not promoted because you were genuinely not worthy of a promotion, and you just tried to make this a gender thing because you decided to have sex with a male coworker who happened to be married, right? And while she's employed there, while she's suing them, they fire her. So they fire her while she's suing them, and it's for other causes, right? And they state the causes very clearly in her termination work. And then while the lawsuit's going on, so then she adds to her lawsuit, she sues them for firing her because she's saying, well, you're firing me because I'm suing you, and it's illegal to fire someone because they're suing you. Like, you're supposed to, in this crazy, sick, fucked up world, you're supposed to hand a biweekly paycheck and health insurance to someone who's suing you in court. That's the world that you live in, and that's just craziness. It's just beyond insane.
Right. Well, people are crazy. I mean, people seem to think that the more difficult I make someone, the more likely they are to like me. That's why I really have no sympathy for, because most people I've discovered do not really want equal, they don't really want freedom. They just want freedom from themselves. And then when they have power, they're going to crush everyone else. And you see this with lawsuits suing a bakery because they don't give you cake. I mean, first of all, why would someone become less homophobic as a result of that? Yeah, you're suing me. I'm really going to like fags more now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wrote about this not so long ago, where I said, look, if a religious man hates gay people because he believes that his deity told him to, well, that's kind of ridiculous, and I'd hope that he got over that. But if the guy hates gay people because they are his political rivals and oppressors, well, that actually makes a great deal of sense. And so he's going to have now a real-world backing for his religious bias that is going to tell him, this is what God told me was going to happen, and sure enough, it's happening right before my eyes. And now he's going to go and get politically active. He's going to be talking to politicians, and his biases are they're going to be ingrained upon the politicians, which he donates to and helps to elect. So let's not be surprised if you go and you do stuff like that and there's a political backlash that does not favor gay people.
Right. And of course, it's very one-sided. I remember talking to one of these leftists, and I said, let's say for the sake of argument that the owner of a bakery is gay, and a bunch of people who don't like homosexuals were about to buy a cake and find out that the owner of the bakery is gay and now are no longer going to buy the cake. Can they sue?
Well, clearly, I mean, by the standard that they're setting, you should be sued for not buying a cake from a guy. I mean, that's how ridiculous this gets.
Right, but the response was, well, no, it's not equal. And I'm like, well, what you're saying is not equal. You're saying one person is able to sue one person, but another person isn't. That
the difference here is that these people hate business, right? They are like, well, if you're engaged in business, then you're a capitalist, and then you're a greedy pig who deserves to be shunned and destroyed just because you're in business. And what I've really come down to, Daniel, is that this is not look. You're trying to figure this out in rational terms, and that's not the same game that they're playing, right? These people are fundamentally detached from reality. It's not a logical discussion that you're having. Tom Woods has a great episode of his show not long ago where he asks the question, is reason enough? And he talks to this guy. And the guy, I forget the guy's name off the top of my head, but he's got a book out about this. And he says, if you think about your logical thought process is like a human rider on top of an elephant. Okay, and all the other stuff that's going on with you, all the your cultural stuff, your emotional stuff, things that are going on in your physical body, these things are the elephant. So your logical thought process is a human being which is riding on top of this elephant, which is all these other things. Now the human rider can tell the elephant, hey, I'd love to go left, I would love to go right, but guess what? You're going where the elephant wants to go, and there's nothing that you could do about it if the elephant makes a decision that the human rider isn't down with, right? And that's, I think, a very good analogy, because you realize when you talk to, if you're in the unfortunate position of trying to have a rational conversation with a leftist, that logic and reason have absolutely nothing to do with it. It's not even that you're going to break through some error that they're making, and that's why you get these things. There was a guy had an interview recently. I forget the guy's name again. I wish I had it handy, but he says reason itself is like a patriarchal white male construct, that reason is just white male thinking, and that it's no more legitimate than any other coming to a conclusion of anything. And it's like, now we're getting to a point where reason itself is a form of oppression, and that's why these people react and freak out and scream at you.
Yeah, I remember something my grandfather said to me years ago, and he said, to expect people who are irrational to be rational is irrational.
Well, exactly. I mean, one of the things that I've sort of tried to do in my work, if you read my writings, you listen to my podcast, I mean, I try to insert, as much logic and reason into that program as possible, but I'm also very purposely putting a great deal of emotion into it, right? There's emotional manipulation going on here, and it's emotionally charged in order to, sort of get that other reaction out of the reader or the listener, and the reason for that is that this is not a rational discussion. That's not fundamentally what's driving politics in the world today. What I would encourage everybody to look at, if you haven't already, Stefan Molyneux has 2 parts out, hopefully part 3 comes out soon, of what he's calling gene wars, the RK selection theory. And you see what's happening, that like people who are dependent on the welfare state, people who are dependent on the government, they rely on this for their way of life. It is a thing that they need. They cannot survive in their lifestyles without it. And on the other side of that coin, you have, that's like the R side of the reproduction strategy. And on the K side, you have the more conservative libertarian people who are sort of, maybe breed a little bit more discriminately, probably, raise more stable families and that sort of thing. And that they do not care for the government. As a matter of fact, the government leeches off of them. So there's a parasite class in the society, and it has no care for the reality of the situation. It has no care for the well-being of the host. It is there to take and to take and to take and to take, and it will do anything that it has to in order to survive. They are reacting to you in an irrational way, the same way that a cornered animal will just lash out and attack a person.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the best things I've ever heard is a friend of mine said, and I think it's 100% true. He said, people aren't rational, they're rationalizers. Everyone, tries to justify why they have the view that they have, and it's not that they use reason to get to the view. They have this view, and then they try to do some manipulation or whatever they can, mental gymnastics, to try to justify the position that they have.
Right. I mean, it's one of these things that, if we are going to be empiricists, if we are going to be reasonable people, if we are going to look at the world and try to figure out how ideas have changed, we have to sort of come to the conclusion at some point that we've done a lot of presenting reason and logic and evidence. I mean, some of the presentations that you hear from some of the great libertarian writers and theorists and presenters, it's to a point where if this was a reasonable discussion, we wouldn't have to have the discussion anymore. The information is there, right? Everybody understands that government is a huge failure. I mean, you think that I was just reading earlier, Hillary Clinton is so now she makes her economics pitch to some university in New York, and it's literally just like, we should be more like Greece, right? I mean, this is the idea here, and you don't even have to study history or economics or philosophy to understand what a failure all of this stuff is. It's happening right in front of your face all over the world. Every time you turn on the television, you see this catastrophe. And, people who tell you we are going to outlaw theft and murder for the children by stealing and killing and putting children $18 trillion into debt before they're even born, it's like the contradiction of the statement itself should be enough to dissuade you from the idea. And then you just go ahead with it anyway, and then you have all these disasters, you have thousands of years of history, and you have what's happening right in front of your face, right before your very eyes in real time today, and you still decide to go with a thing. Well, at some point you've got to say these people aren't worth taking seriously, and they're using force to, carry out their will, and that's a really dangerous problem.
Right. Okay. I guess, so for people who haven't read the article, can you explain attempts to reach the left and unmitigated disaster? Why don't you explain the point you're making in that article?
Well, the idea here being, there's it's not easy being a libertarian in the world today, right? I mean, it's difficult. People hate you just because of your ideas. People, you look at all these people who are more successful than you, who are saying things that are demonstrably false, and you are trying to figure out some way to improve your standing. And so some people, they just give up, right? Some people walk away from it and say, I just can't deal with this anymore. Some people, stand and fight and suffer the consequences. And other people have decided, well, they've got an idea in their heads, they've been told over the years, that libertarianism is fiscally conservative and socially liberal, or right on economic issues and left on social issues. Ed Crane, when he ran for president on the libertarian line with David Koch, he said he was a low-tax liberal. And this line of thinking is antithetical to libertarianism, obviously. So because of that theory, they say, well, if we're left on social issues, then we should reach out to the left on social issues. And they will go and they will say, hey, I really like gay marriage, and I think that transgenders deserve equal treatment, and I'm going to get down with you on all this feminism nonsense. Well, that's not libertarian, right? I mean, that's not, libertarians reject the use of violence to control people's personal behaviors, but that doesn't mean that we want to enthusiastically celebrate homosexuality or transgenderism. It just means that people are free to do as they see fit. It doesn't mean that we oppose discrimination and all of these leftist social issues. But people will reach out to the left in order to increase their numbers and their funding and whatnot, and they'll give in on all these sort of ridiculous talking points and detach themselves from reality. And what ends up happening is it's like inviting cockroaches into your house to clean up some spilled food, that they eat this food that was spilled, and then they replace it with cockroach feces all over your floor, and then they contaminate every morsel in the building. They're literally crawling out of the woodwork. Anything that is not openly hostile to the left will become taken over by it, and you see this in libertarian movements. I'm kicked out of the Free State Project. I'm banned from PorcFest because I was talking about defensive force, right? I got kicked out of Cop Block for the same reason. You had the International Students for Liberty Conference, which Jeffrey Tucker was a part of, with the Students for Liberty and Alexander McCoven, who has outright rejected the non-aggression principle as the basis for libertarianism. They had Center for a Stateless Society there, running around with signs that say "Smash Capitalism for Gender Justice," and then they interrupted Ron Paul's speech to call him a racist, and Walter Block a racist, and Lou Rockwell a racist, and Hans Hermann Hoppe a racist. I mean, and homophobes and everything else. I mean, it's just they are obsessed with these things, and they ruin everything that they get their hands on, which shouldn't surprise us. I mean, economies aren't the only things that leftists destroy.
Right. So a bunch of comments that I want to talk about what you just mentioned. But first, James sort of asked me a question. He says to ask you, why do you keep bringing up the left? Don't people on the right do the same thing? So why does it seem like...
As a matter of fact, they don't. As a matter of fact, they don't. So in my experience, look, if you look at what the impact the left has had on the libertarian movement and the impact that the right has had on the libertarian movement, the left gave us Center for a Stateless Society, Brad Spangler, confessed child rapist. The right gave us Ron Paul. So I would say that the right has absolutely had a greater and more positive impact on the libertarian movement than the left could ever possibly hope to have. One gives us a doctor and a realistic presidential candidate. The other one gave us a child molester. And so I don't think that it's a fair comparison to say that the right has deleterious effects on the libertarian movement the same way the left has. Plus, right-wingers, you can convince them, look, there's this reaction that happens. Somebody's not a big fan of homosexuality, so we automatically jump to assume that they, hate gay people. Well, so what if they do? What if they, if the person has a religious belief that homosexuality is, immoral or something like that? Fine. Do they want a government policy to? Are they trying to pass sodomy laws in 2015? I don't hear that coming from anyone anywhere. Whereas on the left, we absolutely see that they want anti-discrimination laws. So I would say that these are two radically different things, and the right is nowhere near as big a problem as the left.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do agree with you, but first, to be fair, I mean, I think criticizing Center for a Stateless Society because of Brad Spangler, I mean, come on, let's say he didn't rape his daughter, that incident never happened. It would still be a bad website, and they're still saying nonsense. So, I mean, you could just as easily have a pedophile on the right. I mean, I don't really know if that's a great argument.
Well, I think that you are somewhat less likely to have that in sort of your right libertarian circles, because I mean these people are not big fans of sexual deviancy, and of course if somebody is in that sort of pattern of behavior, I think they'd be ostracized fast. I think that you would see. I saw people trying to stand up for Brad Spangler, say, well, it wasn't forced, so haha. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, a prepubescent child not capable of consent to sex, go fuck yourself. But no, I understand that Center for a Stateless Society would be a complete disaster, even if it wasn't founded by a complete confessed child rapist. That would still be just as bad. I actually wrote on my website that the worst thing Brad Spangler put inside his daughter was his ideology. So for all the terrible things that he did to her sexually, turning her into a leftist was a far greater crime. When you try to reconcile libertarianism with anti-capitalism, you're going to create these ridiculous rabbit holes of contradiction, superstition, and complete nonsense.
Yeah, it's sort of like that joke from the 2,000-year-old mind. If someone touches your testicles, that's a momentary thing, but you don't want someone messing with your brain.
Well, certainly, and let's acknowledge that. I mean, when a grown man, sexually assaults a prepubescent child, he's doing things to that person's brain, right? And the thing is that, you expect, a traumatized, victim of a sexual assault to behave, in certain ways that are not necessarily the most rational. But I think that the left really wants us all to behave as victims. I posted yesterday, I saw that they had the New York City's first annual Disability Pride Parade. Like, we should all be really proud of, wheelchairs and spinal cord injuries and being a dwarf and whatever, right? And it's the same thing with the whole transgender thing. Okay, well, look, a transgendered person is a disabled person, right? And I don't think that maybe you need to be making fun of them or giving them a hard time, but I don't think that you should put them on parade and cheer for their disability. I think it's a thing that should be, it's a thing worth having sympathy for, but I don't know that it's worthy of a pride parade. So why don't you start dealing with things and saying, like, okay, look, it's unfortunate that these things are going on. Well, what the left does is say, no, let's celebrate it. And the reason they do that is because they want everyone to behave like a victim. They think that victimhood is actually like a celebratory thing. Somebody who is disadvantaged ought to be put on top. That basically, and that goes along with their anti-capitalism, that they despise success. They see people getting rich and they say, well, wealth is an inherently bad thing. That's why, Bernie Sanders is saying that he wants, like a 90% tax on the wealthy or something like that. I mean, they just hate success, and they just want to bring the bottom up and the top down. And it's like, well, what do you think that does to a society, ladies and gentlemen? What do you think is going to happen when the most successful people in the society are destroyed, and what you promote is disability and dysfunction and failure? Well, you're going to get a society full of disability, dysfunction, and failure, and very little success.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I mean, I think, well, first of all, I do agree with you. In my experience, talking to people who are Democrats and talking to people who are Republicans, in my experience, the Republicans, I think I'm wrong, and that's it. They don't think I'm like evil. Like, the right answer, and you're just doing this because you're a dick. Rather, they disagree. And I think you can respect someone and believe that they're wrong. But in my experience, talking with people on the left, they believe that libertarians are evil. That of course, they know what the right answer is, and they're just doing this because they hate the poor, or they're selfish pricks, or something like this, right? That's why anyone who opposes their inane policies is called selfish and lacking compassion, instead of actually analyzing the issue.
Well, what it is with them is that they're not. Look, it's a funny dynamic, really, because, I mean, you think of the right, you think of religious people, or at least that's what I did for a really long time. And what's odd is that now it's the religious people who are trying to reason with us, and it's the atheists who are just resorting to personal attacks. The left calls you an evil, selfish, hateful bigot because they don't have an argument, right? They're like, well, I'm losing, so I will attack the person who I'm arguing with and just say that they're evil and terrible, because it's a lot easier than trying to make a rational economic argument for a 90% tax on success. So they will just turn around and throw these epithets at you, and it's really no different than resorting to calling someone a racial epithet in the course of an argument. It's just nonsense. So that's why they're doing it. It's that they don't have an argument. People on the right, I mean, look, don't get me wrong. If they're trying to argue for some kind of I don't think that the right is terribly good at making arguments for their feelings on certain. When we talk about the right, and we're talking about the modern right, we're talking about neocons, which is not your old right, pre-Bill Kristol Republican Party. These people today, they want their wars and that sort of thing. They're not terribly good at, sort of making the arguments for forcing me to pay for, foreign military campaigns to murder strangers. And that's not surprising. And a lot of times they'll just resort to saying, you hate America and nonsense like this. But as Rothbard and as Ron Paul have pointed out, I mean, that's not conservatism, right? Like, this is foreign interventionist foreign policy. You talk about your leftist governments of history, the Soviet Union, communist governments are not exactly known for peace. And so these things are, part of the sort of Bill Kristol neocon movement, which is not part of the right. Now, your real conservatives, your pre-Bill Kristol, ideology right wingers in America, they don't advocate for those things, and so you can have a more rational conversation with them.
Yeah, but I think they're sort of a dying breed. It seems like the right is sort of filled with the neoconish, at least since September 11, which was the best thing to ever happen to the government. It gave them a lot of power. They really like that, and they're playing it well. And and so I hate both sides. I'm not a fan of the left. I'm not a fan of the right. I mean, I do think that there is this confusion that to tolerate something means you agree with it, and precisely the opposite. The definition of tolerance is a respect for differences. I remember I was talking to a person once about gay marriage, I think, or something, and he said to me, I believe, that gays should get married and have the same rights as everyone else, and I hope you don't think I'm a bad person, but if I saw my child seeing two people of the same sex kissing, I would be more gross and not want him to view that than if he saw a straight couple seeing. And I said, I don't think you're a bad person at all. Precisely the opposite. You're saying that it doesn't matter what I think. They have a right to their life, and my feelings on the matter are irrelevant. Whereas the left says, I approve of gay marriage because I think gay marriage should be allowed because I approve of it. If I disapproved of it, then maybe I wouldn't be a supporter of it.
Well, right. And I mean, you have this, it runs rampant that like, okay, because I look at any gay pride parade, right? Like that is not a thing that I would want to take children to, right? It's nothing that I particularly want to see myself, right? And things that we would consider like wholly inappropriate for anybody else to do, go on at gay pride parades. And, that's just, oh, well, they're just being flamboyant and gay because they're proud of their homosexuality. And it's like, well, I don't know that necessarily belongs on a public street, frankly, but I'm certainly not going to try to pass any laws to prevent you from doing it. I'm just going to try to keep children as far away from that lunacy as possible. And I don't want kids to get confused about sexuality, right? I mean, it's not I don't think that that's the most positive thing that you could to do. I mean, and teach them. People are going to teach their kids about sex in different ways, obviously, but I mean, I think it would be positive to encourage children towards a one man, one woman type of relationship. But if it turns out that however they're wired turns them to be attracted towards the same sex, then okay, deal with that when they come of age. But I don't disagree with somebody who doesn't want their child exposed to that.
Right. No, I agree. I also think that there seems to be this view that, and this is one of the reasons that I sort of like your work a lot, that libertarianism is about the non-aggression principle, and that's it. And a lot of people seem to add other things to it. I'm a big fan of Adam Kokesh, but I remember once, and Stefan Molyneux, I think, is guilty of this as well, making that if you're a true anarchist, you have to be an atheist. Now, I'm an atheist myself, but they're separate. I'm an atheist and I'm an anarchist. They're not synonyms. And the problem with doing that is, one, you just needlessly draw away every religious person who may be open to anarchy, but is not willing to give up his belief in a deity. So you're just needlessly isolating people, and you're making it what it's not about.
For practical purposes, I don't disagree with you. I mean, I would say, look, if you read Human Action, if you read For a New Liberty, Rothbard and Mises both go through great effort to explain, Rand as well, Ayn Rand, not Rand Paul. All of these people sort of go through this, arduous process to explain that reality exists, that we live in a physical universe, and that when you get into things with mysticism, you are going to get led astray. And I don't think that that's an unworthy thing to point out, because the non-aggression principle is fundamentally useless if you don't believe in reality, right? If you believe that the world is something other than it is, if you are willing to believe that which is demonstrably false, or at best lacking in evidence, well, then you are going to come to some terrible conclusions. And so if you believe that, I believe in the non-aggression principle, but I also believe that property is theft, well, then you're going to have some problems, right? You need certain underlying things to apply a non-aggression principle. And so I'm sympathetic to people who say, well, you need reason first. And religion tends to be the antithetic to reason. And so there's a case to be made for that. However, clearly, I think that I don't know a whole lot of libertarians better than Tom Woods. And Tom Woods is a religious guy. And thus I would have to say, I personally am forced to come to grips with, okay, you could be a religious libertarian because I see them.
Right. Ron Paul, another one, Robert Murphy. Sure. I think there are some great, some great Christian anarchists. I mean, Tolstoy was a pacifist, so I'm not really a fan of that, but you have, J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. I think that, first of all, if you believe someone's going to go to hell, I don't think hell exists, so it's not really a threat. Like, you're actually, but prison is real. So, like, if even if you are religious and believe that there's this end of days and judgment days, and anyone who doesn't follow your religion will be killed. Well, there's no evidence that that's ever going to occur, so it's not a real threat. It's like someone saying, "I'm going to get the Easter Bunny to bite you." Well, there is no Easter Bunny, so I don't really care.
Well, I care because I don't want to necessarily be around with a guy who's going to say, "I'm going to send the Easter Bunny to bite you," right? Like, that's a crazy person. And so, like, look, can you be a schizophrenic libertarian? Sure. I just wouldn't encourage it, right? I'm in New Hampshire. This is a political migration. We have the largest community of libertarians on earth. And so, I mean, we've had situations where people come here and they're fundamentally detached from reality. And, all right, well, if you don't initiate force, then I have to call you a libertarian as sure as I have to call anybody a libertarian. But if you're fundamentally detached from reality, I don't want you to be around me, right? Like, I don't want a guy on a psychotic break hanging around me while I've got to carry a gun to make sure that I'm safe, right? So, there's a certain thing to be said for valuing reason in libertarian circles, but I would not say you have to be an atheist to be a libertarian.
Right. I would agree. And I don't think being an atheist means you're reasonable. I mean, look at Bill Maher or
atheists.
Scientism. Right. But they call themselves atheists. Richard Dawkins, Lawrence Krauss, the new atheists. I think their arguments are very crude. That's why I've often been
secular deism.
Huh?
Secular deism.
Right. And so I think the same thing here. I mean, you had, and I sort of mentioned this on Facebook during PorkFest, speeches that were about nothing to do with libertarianism, like a polyamory. Now, I've joked that I'm not polyamorous. I don't even like myself. But polyamory and libertarianism there's nothing wrong, I think, with polyamory. Personally, I believe in stable relationships. I don't think they're healthy. My own personal viewpoint is it's just an excuse to want to fool around. But you shouldn't be thrown in jail, or it should not be prohibited from doing it. But I think it's that and libertarianism is not synonyms. Libertarianism.
This is your 60s hippie free love new left crap, right? If this is no different than the orgies that the Weather Underground was engaging in, and I don't think that it's a positive influence on the libertarian movement. Again, in New Hampshire, you have this largest community of self-proclaimed libertarians on earth, but a lot of these people are leftists, and that like free love hippie nonsense runs rampant throughout this. And that's part of the reason that people are so hostile towards more right-leaning libertarians, is because they realize that it's a threat to their nonsense. I think that you would be better off if you were going to have a panel on sexual relationships at a libertarian event. I would say that you would want to have a monogamy panel, because you would want to raise children, because I think that's an important thing for libertarians to be doing right now. And you would want to raise them in a stable and loving environment so they grew up to be decent and caring human beings. Instead, you have this idea that, well, we're going to have the polyamory panel and the big gay dance party, and everybody's going to be wasted the entire time because this is what we think libertarian is. It's drug, sex, and rock and roll. And well, no, that's not what this is. That's your hippie crap seeping into the movement, and it's a problem.
Right, and I also think it's a problem because libertarians pride themselves on reason, and our enemies can say, well, this doesn't seem like reason. It seems like just libertinism and people just engaging, and again, morally, everyone has their different moral views. I mean, I would agree with you. I consider myself pretty socially conservative from a moral standpoint, not legally speaking, obviously. I think, you should be able to put any crap you want in your body. I think you should be able to have open relationships if you want, although I don't really encourage it. But I think it is a problem that this is sort of seeping into the movement.
Well, it was interesting. I had a conversation with Richard Heathen the other day on my show, and he's involved with the Libertarian Party of Canada. And they just had this big dust up with their social justice warriors, like expelled a candidate because she had challenged the rape culture myth at some feminist slut walk rally. And so there was this huge backlash against their social justice warrior faction, and they actually got people to step down. They got the candidate reinstated. But in any case, I was talking to Richard on Radical Agenda, and I said to him, I'm like, it's weird for me to be advocating for social conservatism, right? Because I grew up in a religious household and I despised it. And I wanted to get drunk and I wanted to get laid and I hated all this stuff. I felt like it was the church trying to shove all this down my throat. But as I get more involved in libertarian circles, as I'm surrounded by social justice warriors, all this crap that they're trying to shove down our throats, I'm like, this is absolutely worse. I'm not exactly the poster child for social conservatism. I like to drink. I'm a single guy, and I have sex outside of wedlock, and I'm not exactly anybody that you'd want to appoint as the head of your religious institution. But the way that the left has gone so completely out of whack, my lifestyle passes for social conservatism, and that's really how weird things have gotten, and that's because of the left's really far out behaviors, I think.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the most destructive thing for libertarianism is the idea that that we can't offend anyone. And I'm a big believer in. First of all, I don't think making jokes about a horrible incident. I remember I did stand-up comedy for fun a few times, and I remember once I would make jokes about the Holocaust or murder, and people would laugh, and I would make jokes about rape, and then people would say, "Well, now you've crossed a line," which I thought was sort of odd. A rape being worse than mass murder. But I think there is this idea that even a lot of libertarians seem to have, which is we have to be sensitive and we shouldn't be rude. And I'm not encouraging people to be rude, but I think it's important. To me, the enemy of liberty is the idea that my feelings matter and I'm going to violate other people's rights because of my feelings. I'm scared of a gun, so you shouldn't be able to have one. I'm scared of drugs, so you shouldn't be able to have one. The Confederate flag offends me, so I'm going to call the police if you sell one. I don't like what you're saying, it offends me, so you should be quiet. And I think that really is what the libertarian movement, I think, should defend, the right to be a dick.
Well, there's that, and the thing is, though, that it's obviously not about what I realize is it's easy to think that the idea is that you can't offend people. Well, it's not that you can't offend people, because they're willing to offend people all the time. You want to offend religious people? That's perfectly fine with libertarians. That's perfectly fine with leftists. You want to offend social conservatives? You can offend them all day. There are people who you are not allowed to offend, and that is anybody who's engaging in any type of deviant sexual behavior. That's anybody who is disadvantaged in any way. You're not allowed to offend the poor. You're allowed to offend rich people. You're allowed to offend successful people. You're allowed to offend Christians. Muslims, depends on who you talk to. It's classes of people. They believe there are protected classes, and those people you can or cannot offend depending on what their status is to the prevailing social nonsense of the day.
Right. And I think it's actually quite insulting because if someone says there are certain groups of people who it's okay to offend and other groups of people who it's not okay to offend, you're saying that these people who it's not okay to offend are weak. That they're weak and they can't take it and they can't defend themselves like the other groups of people. And it's demeaning.
Yeah, women are strong and equal to men and independent and yada, yada, yada. And yet, if you say anything derogatory about any woman, much less women as a group, you are a terrible person. I love, Jeff Tucker has gone off on his little social justice bent and, we can't say anything racist anymore. But then he says that Black Americans are the most magnanimous people in the history of mankind. So, okay, so it's okay to apply. It's perfectly okay to apply positive traits to an entire group of people. But if you try to apply negative traits to an entire group of people, now you're a bad person. So there's all of this. The rules on it are entirely unclear, and that's not surprising because it's essentially nihilism, right? There is no truth. There is, nothing is absolute. We can do whatever it is that we get approval from our peers for.
Right, and that's why I attacked transgenderism a lot, and I've never attacked homosexuality, and a lot of people thought I was being bigoted, but I said, look, a transgender. First of all, to say sex is real but gender isn't, I don't even know what the fuck that means. I mean, what does it mean? It's a social contract. Are you really saying? Because to me, this sounds sexist. Are you really saying that we have rigidly defined certain genders as being this way, and if you go outside the norm, then you're not really that gender. A man who wears women's clothes and thing is not a woman. It's a man who likes cross-dressing. And fine, you want to cross-dress, nothing wrong with that. But don't think that you're a woman because you put on a dress.
Well, the thing is, and this is what you get from one more of their contradictions, right? On the one hand, they'll say that gender does not matter, but then they'll say that you can change your gender. Well, if gender is irrelevant to your behaviors, then why would you need to change your gender in order to engage in certain activities, right? So it's just one more of their contradictions. It's nonsense. The idea being they put a separation between two synonyms. They said sex is between the legs and gender is between the ears. Well, no, sex and gender are synonyms. They are the same exact word. They're just two different ways of saying the exact same thing. And then they turned around and they said, well, in order to placate our nihilist agenda of nonsense, we will draw a differentiation between two synonyms. And that's just, it's complete horseshit, frankly. So when you're talking about, transgender people, look, this is a problem that people have, right? It's a disorder. And I would like to see them get help for it. They have, outrageous suicide numbers, and a lot of these people, they actually kill themselves after they have the sexual reassignment surgery. They make irreparable alterations to their bodies, and they realize that they still haven't accomplished their goal. And then, rather than deal with the reality that they are not what they're trying to become, they kill themselves. And so that's a thing that when people tell sick people not to get better, that they should instead go and get on a stage and have pride in their disability. Well, that's a pretty sick and deranged thing to say to a person, especially when you try to direct it for political purposes. That's evil. That's bad. And so I want to have sympathy for people who, have problems, but I can't. I have to attack these people who try to turn it into some sort of political social agenda, that they're going to take this disorder and say that this is proof of their gender abolition movement.
Right. I mean, I'm not against people who want to dress up as a man or get surgery or anything like that. But I think, I'm a big fan of reason, and I'm a big fan of not ignoring reality. And I think one of the agenda behind the trans movement, in my view, is once you teach people that reality doesn't matter and that there is no truth and that the truth is whatever you want it to be, this is how you manipulate people. And I think that's a very bad thing to believe.
Right. And if they think that, if they can say that they can change gender, which is a pretty solid thing, it's something that that literally cannot be changed. If you can convince people that gender can be changed, then you can convince them that the government can manipulate economic policy. Then you can convince them that the government can change the fundamental way in which things work. And so, everything has a nature. Okay, everything in this world has a nature. We live in a physical universe where things have properties. And nature, in order to be commanded, must be obeyed. And if you start saying that nature is not a thing, that nature is a social construct, well, then you're going to have bad outcomes, because nature doesn't give a shit about your feelings. Nature is a cruel mistress. Nature will just as soon drown you in a mudslide as give you air to breathe. And if you're not trying to pay attention to how things work in the natural order, then the nature will win out 10 out of 10 times. And so these ideas are incredibly dangerous, especially, our left anarchist friends push this stuff, but these are propaganda mechanisms for government policy at the end of the day, right? They will tell you, don't vote, blah, blah, blah. But then you have, your people like Cassandra Fairbanks are now endorsing Bernie Sanders, right? These things have, effects on government policy. And it's important to remember that even when they're saying, well, non-aggression, I'm not trying to do this through the government, I'm just saying society needs to change. No, they're influencing government policy, and they need to be treated that way.
Right. I also think that I think that it's well, you can't offend people, and so you have to call them what they view themselves. I remember I did a stand-up bit, and we've heard this cliche expression, "You're as old as you feel," and I said, well, if you're as old as you feel, there'd be no statutory rape.
Well,
you're as old as you are.
I saw a great meme, the Herbert the Pervert from Family Guy. It was like, I should be able to date teenage boys because I identify as a teenager, right? And well, okay, so if you're just going to say, okay, well, I guess it's okay for, a 60-year-old man to go up to a 10-year-old and be like, hey, show me yours and I'll show you mine, because, 10-year-olds will do that from time to time, right? So if he just identifies as a 10-year-old, and it's okay for him to pull out his dick because, it's just kids playing.
Yeah. I also love the hypocrisy because people on the left criticized Rachel Dolezal. They said, oh, there's no such thing as transracial, and she's just faking it, and you know, doing the stereotypes with the nappy hair and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, I don't understand. So you could change your gender but not your race. I mean, I don't. One's a social construct and one isn't. I don't think I totally get that.
Well, you know, I saw another interesting piece from AntonioBuehler.org, where he was writing that Rachel Dolezal was a hero of social justice, because what Rachel Dolezal really did was what we should all be doing and checking her privilege, right? She donned the skin of the oppressor and wore the skin of the oppressed. It was I think it might have been a little satire, but you know, it's an interesting thing that they. But you saw it on both sides, though, right? People were saying she's appropriating culture, that she's taking advantage of affirmative action, different things. But then other people said, well, yeah, we should embrace Rachel Dolezal's transracialism. I mean, identity is a, you know, social construct and all of this. Let me just address social construct real quick. A lot of things are social constructs, right? Time is a social construct. Good luck ignoring it. Like time, we totally made time up, right? Like clocks did not exist prior to mankind, right? But good luck ignoring time. Money is a social construct. Good luck ignoring money, ladies and gentlemen. Just try to change the nature of money and see how that pans out for you. Oh, yeah, we already did that, and that's how you get Zimbabwe and Greece and all this crap. So, you know, there are a lot of things that are social constructs, which are things that human beings put together to make sense of the world. And if you ignore them, they are based on things that actually exist. You know, money is a unit of account to exchange value between human beings. Time is a measurement of something that is the most scarce resource that we have all available to us. It's the one thing that we cannot create more of. So those things are social constructs that are very extraordinarily important to the functioning of human society and towards our decision-making processes. And so gender, all right, let's just say that gender is a social construct. Okay, well, good luck ignoring it, because if you ignore gender, then you can't breed, and then human society ceases to exist. So, you know, these things matter, whether they're social constructs or, you know, things that are hard-coded into our DNA, which they happen to be. And so people who pretend that they don't matter are at odds with the universe. And again, when you go against the nature of the world, the nature will win.
I also find it interesting that all the people who are like, well, you don't know what it feels like to be a man, or you don't know what it feels like to be black or white. All it takes is money and surgery, and all of a sudden you can identify as that label. Seems sort of interesting to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I actually have long felt that I was a rich man born into a poor man's body, and I'm trying to raise the funds to have the operation to fix that. That I am trans financial, as it turns out.
Yeah, I'm also, you know, I'm a thin man stuck in a fat man's body. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually, in my mind, I have a very no, I'm not going to do it. But so, you know, there are things about our lives which we would all like to change, okay? And there are things that we would like to believe about ourselves that are not true. And so if we are just going to say, well, because it's in my mind, then it is real, and everybody just owes it to me to accept that, it's going to have bad outcomes.
No, I agree with that. Anyway, it was a good show. Great having you on. We should do this again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, ChristopherCantwell.com or RadicalAgenda.com.
No problem. Take care.
Take care, buddy.